Hi, Neil.
Hi, Alan.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. And thank you so much for setting some time aside for this values jam. I'm fascinated to see which card we're going to choose and also how the conversation is going to go. But before we get into that, would you like to introduce yourself and the great work that you do?
That's very kind of you to talk about great work. I'm not quite sure about that. But my name is Neil Hawkes. I always think of myself as a teacher. Um, I've been teaching for many years. I now teach mainly adults, but I do teach children as well from time to time when I go into schools. I'm passionate about helping children to take control of themselves from an ethical point of view. Um, I want to help children feel the innate essence of who they are and fill themselves up with wonderful things that they've already got, really. So filling them up is the wrong expression. But my passion in life is to help us all to be more peaceful and give out the love that a lot of people find difficult to show nowadays. Anyway, that's a little bit about me. But
Thank you very much. And I use the word great intentionally because for me it's two dimensions actually. One is the values piece that you've referred to, but I don't know what it is actually, but there is something inside me that tells me that teaching is the most important profession in the world. And the reason I believe that is because teachers have the potential to inspire future generations. And what is more valuable than that?
yeah, I totally agree with you. A phrase I often use in my trainings is I ask teachers whether they feel they're wonderful. And that's an interesting question, especially in the United Kingdom. There is at the moment a very sort of, oh dear, we're not wonderful, everything's terrible, mental health is, and so to even dare to think that you're wonderful is not on. But then I explain that I think they're all wonderful because they send messages to the future. And that's exactly what you said, Alan. At that moment that you have with a student of whatever age can be a formation experience, which it goes with them. We can all remember, can't we, Alan? Teachers that have either made us feel wow, or teachers that have gone, oh, yeah. So the responsibility of being a teacher is huge. Uh, but the rewards are incredible, not in a monetary sense or materialistic sense. But when we depart this planet, I think the important thing to think about is what real effect did our little lives have? And it's only in sharing in relationship with other people
Yeah.
as much as you can. And none of us are perfect. I'm far from it. And I have my moments where I'm not all sweetness and light, I'm sure. If Jane were here, my wife, I'm sure she'd give instances where I'm flooded with certain parts of my personality, which we all have. But it's being aware. And what we need to do in our work is help ourselves to be more aware and then help others to be more aware. So we transform. It sounds rather grand, actually, to say transform consciousness. It sounds a bit, but it's nudging, it's turning up the volume a bit so that we are just a tad more aware of the effect we have on ourselves first and other people second.
Yeah, and that's a really good segue into the game Values Jam that we're going to be playing now, because when we designed this, we wanted to do just what you've described, which is to provide a space for people to explore a value and talk about a value in a way in which we often don't find time to do.
Hmm.
Um, it's called Values Jam and it's based on the concept of a music jam. So, a music jam, musicians are not pre qualified, they just turn up. And then they're not really given anything in the way of a brief or guidance. And so they just start and they find their way. If somebody stumbles, nobody calls the whole thing to a halt and holds an inquisition. They just roll with it and maybe build in what has happened into the way that the piece develops. And we love that kind of intuitive approach. So that's how ValuesJam works. So what I'm going to do is take the deck and ask you how many times you'd like me to cut the deck of cards.
3 times.
Okay. And so would you like me to pick the left, center, or right pile?
Center.
Okay. And now we've got 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 17 cards. So a number between 1 and 17, Neil.
17.
Ooh. Well, so you, Neil Hawkes, have chosen the card, sustainability. And on the back of the card, there are a series of questions. I'm not sure if you can see. But the only thing that's important is for us to start with the first question and finish with the last question. In between, we'll use any of those 4 questions if we feel that we need to do that. But to start with, to get into this, what does sustainability mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Sustainability is what I call a super value. What I mean by that is that it's made up really of many other values. And so it's composite. It's like altruism and those sort of power words. And sustainability is a word that trips lightly off the tongue nowadays. It's become one of those buzzwords that go around, and buzzwords often lead to a lack of clarity about what they actually mean. So to actually be pinned down to sustainability is really interesting. Sustainability for me does not mean maintaining the status quo. So to sustain can often mean to continue what you are doing and maintain that. Certain political parties always go back to their roots and want to sustain a past, perhaps, or a glorious past they think was glorious but wasn't really. So sustain can mean that. The ability, sustainability, the ability to sustain for me means being able to sustain the essence of who we are on this planet and enable that essence to flow out into the world and be a creative force, not just a sustaining force, but a creative force that helps our future to be one where humanity and the whole of our planet flourishes. So sustainability for me is that ability to take a journey inwards and ask, how are we sustaining ourselves? What the Dalai Lama once said to me was, Neil, we need to look for wise selfishness. I thought, oh, what a funny term, selfishness. And what, of course, he was meaning was to really think deeply about how you maintain yourself and those qualities of yourself so that you can then go outward. So many of us spend a lot of time expecting others to change. If only the current prime minister would do this, then all would be well. If only, if only, and I'm not making a point about our present prime minister, could be any leader in the world. you know, if only Mr. Putin would, drop off his perch, it would be okay. But what people fail to realize is that the external world is a projection of our internal world. That internal world of a human being creates what we see and what we call as reality. We impact on the world through our internal world.
Mhm.
The books behind you, for instance, are there because somebody has thought of them and brought them into being. They didn't exist until that happened. So what I'm saying is that each of us, and the older I get, the more I realize that I have to work on myself. We have to actually be the change, as Gandhi said, that we want to see in others. So, Alan, I think the first thing is sustaining yourself so that you then can sustain outside of yourself. I'll pause there. I could go on, but I'll pause.
Yeah, and you've just touched on so many different things there, Neil. And I think the first thing you said that resonated with me was how sustainability has become this kind of buzzword and a particularly strong association with the environmental movement, and it's almost come to mean just that
Yeah.
for a lot of people.
Mhm.
And just as you said, I think that means that there is certainly ambiguity and a lack of clarity around what it really does mean. And I've got quite a simplistic view actually of sustainability, and that is the ability to keep doing stuff in a way that is valued um, over a period of time. And partly what you said also about it being a super value in that it contains other values as well. I think in terms of being able to keep going and adding value over a period of time, you need to be able to adapt to the developing environment around you in order to be sustainable. Because if you do not, and if you behave the way that you described, where you're just looking to the past and holding on to that, then you are likely not to be performing optimally, and you're possibly at risk of not being relevant and dying, going out of existence. So it's all about understanding your impact on the environment that is around you and changing over a period of time in order for you to be able to be sustainable. I love the Dalai Lama quote, "A wise selfishness," because, like you've said, people sometimes are all too ready to look at others. They should do this, they should do that. Whereas in fact, it does. It starts with us, doesn't it? The one, maybe it's a question for you actually, because sometimes I feel frustrated that I'm not able to have more of an impact myself. Um, so what's the balance in terms of achieving sustainability between the impact that an individual can have versus the systems within which we exist?
It's a really good question. I love what you say about sustainability too. Yeah, as you were speaking, my mind was seeing a lady, and the lady was, I met her on Monday of this week, and she lives in Coventry, and I was standing in primary schools. Head teachers and teachers in the morning now, good schools, do meet and greet. They go outside to welcome the children and welcome parents. You can often have those really important conversations with the parent, for instance. So the parent isn't building up with whatever and thinks they've got to have an appointment. It's then dealt with very quickly. And there was one lady that came, and I was standing with the head teacher, and this particular lady was asked, well, what do you think of this values school? And she was glowing, absolutely glowing. Now, this lady, when the head teacher, when she moved on, the head said, well, that lady has just been served with eviction notices. She's on her own. She has children. They really find life tough. This lady was obviously in a context that I've never been in. And it got me marveling at two things. One, the impact that a culture can have that is relational and caring and deeply listening on a community. And despite the fact that there are challenges for the community, the inspiration that a school can have is phenomenal. The second thing is that lady lives in a context, and the context is survival.
Yeah.
And it's all very well for you and me to sit here pontificating about values and, you know, higher order and transformation and consciousness. But if you are worried about being evicted, or your children, you know, you woke you up, as one of her children did, at 2 o'clock in the morning, and she hadn't slept, and she wasn't quite sure where she was going to get some food for the day. That is a context in which really makes you think about this word sustainability and how you can really help systems. Systems. I made a decision, Alan, many years ago that I would work at grassroots, not with our masters and mistresses. And I've often been challenged by that. Someone who's quite famous challenged me once. He said, Neil, you know, you waste your time going around. You will never have a real impact. You know, you ought to be strategic, he told me. That was the word, strategic, you know, curry favor with those in power. I've always avoided that. I will never get a no, I've got a doctorate, a knighthood or something like that. But I won't, because I keep under the radar, because I want the people like that school that I was in. I want them to get the praise, not me. So to divest oneself of ego is, I think, hugely important on this values journey. I can't say I'm totally devoid of ego, because that's probably impossible. I don't know. But I really am conscious of that. And the systems that we have, if I just take education, I think they've been produced by workaholics. Workaholics love designing systems that are complex, and they forget that ordinary human mortals have to do it. They are often people that haven't got any understanding about how children learn and how we resource that learning. They are outcome people. They want data. They want to show that, you know, that we're improving. And they have measures on mathematics, literacy, for instance, but they don't have no measure for the heart and the character and the motivation, how you can inspire children to exceed anything that they dreamed of. There's no measures for that. So what happens is the system designs a curriculum. I'll give you for instance, you know, the school I was in on Monday, they have to, national curriculum, so they have to do, what was it, Egyptians or something. And those children, you know, 2 children had just arrived from Sri Lanka, having got out of the war. They're refugees, really. And our national curriculum thinks it's important for them to learn about the ancient Egyptians. Perhaps it is, but I think there's things more important first. You know, we used to say you start where a child is and you move outward. So you think about the context they're in, what they're experiencing in their neighborhood, who's doing things, and then you move out from that. And then gradually later on, my big beef is that we expect children to have knowledge now, which is irrelevant. gosh, people will jump up and down when I say that. They say, oh, it's important to have knowledge. Well, I've got an iPhone next to me. I can pick up knowledge very, very quickly. But young children need to have other things. They need a love of learning, a feeling that they can really go places at whatever level they want, that life has hope for them. Yes, you teach them the basic skills and all that, but whether we really need to know at year 9 or 10 what a preverbal clause or something is, I just don't know. I've written many books as you have, and I'm not sure I've needed to know that, but young children do. So what I'm asking for in education is a balance, sustainability. Let's come back to our word. To sustain a balance between the affective and the cognitive domains, not just look for the cognitive. If I don't think I did very well as a child because I was a daydreamer. I looked out the window, probably having dreams of things that could be, and I wasn't listening. So I would have been in the data now, someone who wasn't doing very well, etc. So yeah, I won't go on any more about some of my beefs because that's not relevant for today.
Well, I
But
think it is. I think it is, Neil. I
is it?
really do think it is, because listening to what you were saying there, I started to think about how, unless a fresh look is taken at education, I wonder whether it is sustainable,
Mm,
because it is not moving with its environment. And just as you've said, there's two particular parts to this for me. One is the one that you mentioned about knowledge being at your fingertips. That never used to be the case. So the role of the teacher was the guardian of the knowledge and the imparter of the knowledge. That was their role. I have the knowledge, you don't have the knowledge. I'm the only person you can get it from. I'm going to give it to you. Because knowledge is now accessible, that role is no longer needed effectively or to the same degree. And instead of that, I think that a teacher's role is more of a facilitator, coach, inspirer to get the child to go and find that knowledge which is accessible to them.
mm,
And then the other thing is that we used to teach people so that they were equipped more or less for the rest of their life. You could teach accountancy, and then somebody could have a career for 40 years as an accountant, basically, with that knowledge.
yeah.
Whereas now, knowledge is becoming transient, actually. And so, why are we attaching so much importance to knowledge when it might be relevant today, but it might be redundant tomorrow?
Mm. It's very good points you make. Education systems are about distribution. I always remember many years ago realizing that education is a distribution process. And when you fail, you get turfed out. You're distributed, in other words, into the economy. So what education has been about is how we maintain a capitalist economy, and how we produce the workforce for that. If you go back to 100 or so years, the basic education of children in 1870, when education really started for everybody in this country. But still, our lords and masters in the House of Commons didn't want to give real education because they thought it would stir up the working class, to challenge the status quo. So we kept another curriculum, a liberal curriculum it was known as, for our private public schools, so that they could rule our empire. And the likes of me would have learned sewing and PE, but we could write beautifully. We could keep a ledger beautifully because we had to clerk the empire. And if we weren't up to that, then we'd work in the fields. school holidays are where they are because of harvest, no other reason. And we still go on having examinations at the complete wrong time of the year when everyone's hot and sweaty in a room trying to pass it out. It's absolutely nonsense. But the trouble is, Alan, that, I don't know, I don't work formally in the system, but people in the system have a vested interest.
Yeah.
So if you're an Ofsted inspector, you're not going to vote to get rid of yourself. People don't do that. So the system creaks on. I'm an ambassador for a group that's trying to look at the curriculum in this country. It's called the Federation of Education Development, and they are doing their best to be forward thinking. But I sometimes think we're forward thinking, but too much in the context of what is. And the problem is, if you're not in the context of what is, you are dismissed. You are thought of as too outside, too revolutionary. And an education system is very, very slow to change. So you're almost needing a benign dictator to take over and shift to what it actually needs. What breaks my heart, Alan, sometimes is that I then work with some independent or international schools that are doing things differently. Last week, I worked with High Scope Indonesia, and they are doing much of what we're talking about this morning that we would like to see. My big thing in my values work at the moment is how you develop ethical leadership. Ethical leadership, for me, should be at the center of the curriculum. What we need is every child to have ethical leadership so that whatever role they play in life, they are working from an ethical base. And that's the point of teaching them about values and things. That values is the way you develop an ethical vocabulary, which stimulates ethical intelligence, which then makes you an ethical leader. Last year, I think it was, I worked for the V20 group, which you know about. And I wrote a paper with a colleague on really sustainability, because the whole thing was, how can we achieve the United Nations 17 sustainable goals? How can we do it? And I argued in the paper that we have to develop ethical leadership, because it's all very well for the political leaders of the world to meet and COP27 or whatever they're called, but it's meaningless if they are actually, rogues and liars and cheats and all the rest of it. And I'll call them out on that. How you can stand up and say you believe one thing, and then the next day you will do exactly the opposite, because the thing about language is, who controls the narrative controls power. So no one wants me to be in control, because they say, oh my gosh, we don't want revolutionary thoughts here. So I will be marginalized. People will say, well, Neil Hawkes, yes, he would say that, wouldn't he? That's a lovely expression, people. And that's a real put down, meaning, oh, don't take any notice of Neil Hawkes. So, yeah, it's really interesting. So sustainability has to be on the agenda for world leaders, but from the point of view of their own ethical leadership. And so, yeah, that's the values stuff. People often have listened to me. I'm sure they've said, "Oh, it's all about being a nice person." How can we be all nice and cuddly and pretend the real world doesn't exist? Utter tosh. Values are the most difficult, challenging area to be involved in, because if you take it seriously, it does hold a mirror up to yourself and challenges you. Otherwise, you can be accused of hypocrisy. If I say one thing and do another, people will soon dismiss me. Yeah, I think about that a lot, how you can maintain your integrity. So, yes, I think I've said enough now, Alan.
Yeah, and on on the point around sustainability and values, I think going back to what we were talking about the importance of knowledge previously, it feels to me as though we were guided by knowledge, and quite rightly so, because it didn't change over time, and so knowledge was power.
Mm.
Whereas now that's kind of disappearing very, very fast. And that's why I believe that values will continue to emerge as the best foundation for guidance that we have.
Mm.
So, for instance, careers, and this kind of goes back to schools again, it's always kind of confused me that when somebody is, say, 16, a teacher says to them, "Oh, you're good at sciences. Why don't you do physics, chemistry, and maths? And then when you've got those qualifications at A level, you'll be able to go to a good engineering university and you'll be able to become an engineer." And so the 16-year-old says, "Okay, that sounds fine." And and then they go to university, they become an engineer, they get a job, they get promoted, they maybe change career, they get to 30 years old, and then they look around them and they just think, how the hell did I get here? This isn't me. Well, and imagine instead of that, if the teacher had helped the 16-year-old to understand what was truly important to them, and then they made choices about subjects and career and all the rest of it according to that instead. And it just strikes me that that is far more sustainable than the way that we deal with it at the moment.
Yes, very, very true. It's an inappropriate filling of an existential vacuum. So you have that youngster, whereas we know neuroscience tells us that at that age, the brain is being reconstructed. Empathy disappears. Tolerance does too. We've all had teenagers. We've all been teenagers. That's a natural process. And then, as you say, because the economy and the system needs certain things to happen, children are put in or encouraged to do certain things. A few children, of course, step outside of the box and do what they want to do, but it's very easy to fall into following the advice of an adult. And yes, you're making me think of one of my main heroes in my life, Viktor Frankl, who, he was always talking about what we have to do is help children find their meaning and purpose. And he always used to say, you find that spark in them, was his word. And you nurture that spark. And that's, for me, the role of an educator, is to nurture the spark that exists within someone. They may not know what it is. And I always quote something else he quotes, and that is about how we see other people. I always implore teachers to think of the words of Goethe. If you take a person as they are, you make them worse. If you take a person as they could be, you make them capable of becoming what they could be. So when that child enters your classroom and you think, my gosh, what are we going to do now? Then you don't. You say, step back. Let's connect with that person as they could be. That person will then pick up from you that you believe in them. You are not accepting their behavior if it's inappropriate. That's different. But as a human being, you are going to listen to them, you're going to accept them, and you're going to nurture them so that they go on to be the best version of themselves they possibly can be. That is the nub of good teaching.
Yeah, what you're touching on there, I think, is this, for me, the almost contradiction between potential and kind of the lowest acceptable bar.
Mm.
And it seems to me that the system is designed actually for the latter rather than the former. And I'll just share with you, I was in my kind of waking up mode the other day, so still more asleep than awake. But I was thinking about goals and targets and performance measurement and all that sort of stuff. And in my sleep state, I started wondering why we use and attach so much importance to those things. And I concluded that actually it wasn't to perform better, which is what people tend to think of it as. I concluded that it was our desire to feel as though we're in control. So, even if you're 10% short of the target you'd set yourself, I know that I'm 10% short. And so now I can aim to close that gap. Whereas I'll give you an example from my work in the corporate world. We were opening a help desk, a new help desk in this property portfolio. And I said to my client, we need to set a target for the performance of the help desk. How shall we go about that? And he said to me, well, what are the others performing at? So I said, well, it's around about 70%. It doesn't matter how that was calculated, but 70%. So he said, okay, well, do you think we could go for 72? So I was quite new in the job, and I'd come from five-star hotels where it's all about, what's the very best that you can do? And I was a bit disappointed in his response and a bit confused as well, but I didn't want to say anything at that stage. I took it away and went to my team and I said, look, the other places are at 70%. The clients just said, could we get to 72? What's your view on this? And they said, well, we get a bonus according to achieving the target. So could you knock him down to, say, 71? And maybe that's what we could do. So I thought about this for a couple of days, and then I went back to the client and I said, how brave are you feeling at the moment? And he was a bit quizzical. And I said, what I'd like you to do is guarantee my team the bonus in advance. And what I'd like you to do is have no target for year one for this new help desk. And let's see what we can do. And we achieved 92% that first year. So, sorry, it was a bit of a long story, but I think that demonstrates the difference between the need to feel in control and, you set the 71 or the 72 and then you feel really good about it and maybe you hit it and maybe you don't. But what you've missed is that 20% of potential when you are confident and brave enough to not know what you're going to achieve and just find out. So that was a bit of a blurt there, but it and what is more sustainable?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh, I applaud what you say. Coming back to my world, which is interesting, is that often schools were put on their websites. We create an environment where each child will achieve their potential. I say, how on earth can you say that? Because my belief is that there is no glass ceiling on potential. Potential can be, whoa, you can't close it in. It's just, how does one know what a potential is? We have limitless potential as human beings, but we close it down. And so I loved what you said. And, yeah, what you did, Alan, in that was something I hold dear, is you release the creative dynamic of those people working in that. So if you release the creative dynamic, you're not putting targets on them. Something's happening that you've allowed them to come out, and because of the trust you showed in them, they then knew that they could deliver.
Yeah.
But it's the correct way round to getting the culture so that people will just love working. The school I was in on Monday in Coventry, I took a picture of the whole staff at the end because the consistency between them all about what they were all doing, how they were all singing from the same song sheet. There was no ambiguity. So together they created this beautiful culture which held the children. It held them so that the children could then be who they could be, going back to Frankl. But so many institutions, not, I work, as you know, with corporates more now and with people like the army, which is teaching me a lot. But in all those, they have systems which limit potential. They limit people because the system needs measurements, crude measurements. Someone somewhere needs to know that so many people get through this test. And so we all try and get through the test, and we all help them, and we'll even cheat to make sure they get through the test. What's the point of it all? Why not? That needs to be changed and to release the potential of everybody.
And you know what you've touched on there, I'm thinking of it as the dark side of sustainability, actually, because we've talked about the education system. There's no doubt it has been sustainable. It's really hard to shift, but that's not a good sustainability. And I don't know where I'm going with that thinking, but I'd never really thought about sustainability in a suboptimal way.
That's so really interesting.
It's almost like sustainability has to be couched in intention and ambition. Because if it's not, it becomes survival for the wrong reasons.
Yes.
Now, in the 4 questions, Neil, one of them, I wonder if I could invite you to have a go at. So it says, ask your own question about sustainability, starting with who, what, where, when, why, or how. So would you like to have a go?
My own question about sustainability. Yeah.
And if you don't fancy it, I can choose one of the others.
No. Yeah. Is sustainability a myth?
Whoa.
Yeah.
So how real is the concept of sustainability? So if I think so, I'm thinking back to what I was referring to as sustainability at the beginning about this keeping going. So I think that sustainability is real because you can tell whether something is still here and in operation or not. And we've talked about some good examples of that and some less good examples of that. But I think the myth piece is what we had just touched on for me about sustainability in itself is not a positive thing for me anymore. I hadn't really thought about this before this conversation. And so I think I would broaden or lengthen the question to how real is sustainability in terms of value creation or something like that, as a force for good or something like that.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on?
I think the word was first used to mean a sustaining ecosystem, so that we have to make sure our ecosystem of the planet, the macro ecosystem, actually is sustained in order that we continue living on this planet. So I think it's out of that niche that we have used this word sustainability. I haven't got it now, but someone sent me a book the other day where someone really challenges the notion of sustainability and is thinking about creation rather than sustainability, how you create, and looking in that sort of way rather than the negative sides as we're exposing. It's really interesting conversation, isn't it? Because this is the great thing about values thinking. It is that it, at one level, you think, oh yeah, sustainability, and then you start peeling away the onion, and you then go to a deeper level. You know, in my talks, I'm always referring to Aristotle's golden mean. And when you take a word, you know, what do you actually mean? Because if you have too much of it, all what we think of as positive values can actually have a negative side to them.
Mm-hmm.
You either have too much of it or not enough of it.
Mm-hmm.
A word like courage, if you have too much courage, you'll probably kill everybody around you, because, you know, you'll be foolhardy. If you haven't got enough courage, you'll be a coward. So we've got to really dig deep into what we mean when we use these words. And I think sustainability, you know, it's, you know, I think, Alan, I challenge you to write a paper now on sustainability and what it means and how we should really think about it, and all the challenges and all the wonderful things you've said this morning about it. So yeah.
I think it's that I'm starting to create a difference between the purpose or the intention and the system in terms of sustainability, because and it's this means and end type thing. You know, when we set out to do something, we start with the end. You know, that's what I want to achieve. Let's say educating children. And then you put in place a system to enable the end to be achieved. But it strikes me that all too often, certainly in my experience in the corporate world, people get consumed with the process,
Yeah.
and forget what the end was in the first place. And relating this back to sustainability and education specifically, the sustainability is applied to the system rather than being applied to the purpose.
Brilliant. Brilliant. I love that. So we need to revisit the purpose.
Mm.
Yes.
And how sustainable is the original purpose? And is the original purpose still valid
Yes.
because of the changing environment in which we exist?
Yes, it's like having a vision statement, isn't it? And
Mm.
in what your vision is, and revisiting the vision. Because what I notice that organizations will go in for a bit of visioning, and then they'll go in, as you say, to, you know, well, how do we deliver that? And then they get stuck on how they deliver and how they measure. So they spend hours measuring the thing. And then someone says, well, let's look at our vision again. It was probably really great, but they fail because, yeah.
Yesterday, I had a ValuesJam with a guy called Nithin. He is a medical student. And a few years ago, a colleague and he set up a community for medical students called Scrubbed Up. And yesterday, we were talking about the value of innovation. And you know, Scrubbed Up was really new thinking because there just was no form of community, and he provides a platform for that community to enjoy and benefit from. And his takeaway actually from our conversation was that he would remind himself more frequently about the reason why they set up Scrubbed Up. Because when you think about originating something, you're full of energy. Then, when it comes to the hard work of putting in place all of the kind of more menial things that need to be in place for it to work, it can be easy to get caught up in the quicksand and the energy is sucked out of you. And what he said yesterday was that the conversation had been a really good reminder that he needs to keep drawing on the energy of what he set out to create and just regard the stuff that he's going through at the moment as something to get through rather than be bogged down by. And maybe there's something about that to do with sustainability as well, actually. Now, sorry.
I was just going to add something that I don't feel systems allow enough of, and we as individuals don't either, and that is space.
Yeah.
We've become so much human doings. We're always wanting to do things, and we don't have this space to be. And, you know, all the great thinkers that I've come across have always had time to be. And, you know, I'm a daydreamer. Some of my ideas come when I'm out for a run, because I run, or when I'm swimming, or when I'm just sitting here looking out of my window, looking at the reservoir that I can see out of my window. It's not when I'm sitting down with a piece of paper trying to think. You know, it doesn't happen for me. Yeah. So
And again, I think that relates back to this point about control versus allowing things to happen. Because like you've just said, you have the faith, if you like, and the confidence and the courage to give yourself the space and allow what comes to come. Whereas so many people are uncomfortable with that, and they feel more comfortable saying, I'm going to spend an hour brainstorming. And then I know I've done it. And if I didn't do it really well, I know I'll do it better next time. And it's this thing about wanting to be in control all the time, which is kind of, I'm beginning to wonder how it kind of seems pointless to a certain extent to me. Now, before we come to the last question, I just want to remind you, I think, of something that I heard you say some time ago. And in ValuesJam conversations, this often happens. So I don't know what it was actually specifically. I think it was the bit where you were talking about children learning about the Egyptians and do they really need to, and what would be a better way. And I think I remember this right, where you said something like, rather than sitting in a classroom, I would rather a child be out in the woods wondering about a spinning jenny and then being taught about the physics of what had happened there as being far more relevant for them. And that do I remember that right, Neil? I mean, that just seems to stick with me.
I've probably done a version of that, but I don't remember that particular example. But I'm greatly influenced by thinkers such as the Ukrainian thinker Sukhalemsky, who was absolutely incredible educator in the 40s, and his wonderful book, My Heart I Give to Children. And he believed, oh, look at that, Alan, you've got wonderful. You've obviously heard me mention him before. But that sort of understanding again about how young children learn and how neuroscience now, Sukhalemsky didn't have the advantage of neuroscience. He just instinctively knew how children learn, but now we know how the brain develops.
Yeah.
So to link experience with understanding and learning is the way to do it. So with a young child, give them lots of experiences that they can then have. In Coventry, I was talking to the head teacher, and many of the children in the area had not even been to the city centre, let alone a seaside or anywhere else. So the school is doing its best to take them on trips, take them to a pantomime, take them to a wood, give them those sort of basic experiences. They have a chart of the 101 things a child should experience before they leave here.
That's lovely.
It's lovely, isn't it? And that's what we need to do, is have that. So yes, at one stage in my career, I was county advisor for Buckinghamshire, and one of my responsibilities when my friend Alan Byrne retired, the principal advisor gave me the responsibility for environmental study centres. At that time, Buckinghamshire had 5. And I used to go along and see children from Milton Keynes experiencing for the first time running in a field. And the inspirational work of those teachers at those centres, I thought, this is, inverted commas, real education.
Mm-hmm.
Education is drawing out, not forcing in. It's allowing people to to experience and think. And we go on through our life experiencing, one of the joys of my life has been the opportunity to travel and listen to people and learn through the wisdom of other people. And that's what experience does. But if you are someone like that lady who is worried about being evicted, then you start in a different place. And that's where I could go on, if our time's nearly up, but we could go on to society and what sort of society we need to create for the 21st century. It needs to be sustainable, but sustainable in the ways that we've described during our talk this morning.
Yeah, and I think that's a brilliant way to bring this conversation to a close. And what we'll do with the last 2 minutes is ask this question. So, what are you encouraged to do differently about sustainability as a result of our conversation today?
Oh, wow. I shall never think of the word in the same way. And it's made me think too, Alan, that we need to help children through cards like you've had to have these conversations in groups. I'm always talking about ethical dilemmas and giving children the opportunity to think about ethical dilemmas. I think your jam cards are very good for stimulating a group discussion. And because oracy is so important, as I said earlier, who controls narrative controls. And some of the children I visit in some schools are not given an extended language code because of where they've been brought up. No fault of their own, and fault of the people they live with. But those children that have a rich language, they're often no more intelligent than the other children, but they haven't got the language. And therefore, using these sort of means of a jam card can help people develop their oracy, because we learn oracy by listening to other people and then saying, well, what do you mean by that? So another form I love in schools is philosophy for children, P4C. And P4C teaches you the manners of a conversation, how no idea is wrong, how you respect people's ideas. So having the values jam gives you the context for discussing values, but also develops a lot of other higher order thinking skills and behavioral skills too. So yes, it has been an incredible conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you and learning from you, Alan, and hopefully contributed a bit myself. So thank you.
Yeah, it's been values jams are just a wonderful collaborative exercise. They just always feel as though you're discovering something together, which is a great feeling. The thing that I'm going to do differently about sustainability is whenever I'm thinking about making something sustainable, I'm going to make sure that I focus on the purpose and not the system stuff, because I have a feeling that I don't do that actually. I probably focus a bit too much on what do we need to keep this going, rather than what do we need to keep the original purpose going. So thank you you've raised I've got a load of scribbles here, so lots to read up on, and I'm going to have a listen to this. Should we make it public? Thanks very much, Neil.
Thank you very much, Alan.